Madam President.
The Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, I'd like to thank Senator Murray for organizing all of us to come to the floor in honor of Mother's Day. And I want to take my time to talk about the ongoing attacks on women's health in this country. I feel a sense of urgency about the increasingly hostile, escalating, and unrelenting attacks on women's health by Donald Trump and Republicans. From continuous efforts to defund Planned Parenthood, to taking away Title X funds, to trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, all programs that support health care for millions of women in this country. And I have to ask, why? What is the motivation for taking away health care services for millions of women in this country? It's not clear why they're doing this, but what is clear is the harm they're causing to women. Repealing the Affordable Care Act would mean that insurance plans would no longer be required to cover maternity care and birth control. Insurance companies would be able to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. Astoundingly, for women, this includes pregnancy. By proposing trillion-dollar cuts to Medicaid, Donald Trump and congressional Republicans endanger tens of millions of women in this country who rely on Medicaid for coverage during pregnancy and birth. Do they even care that these cuts to Medicaid are particularly cruel in the face of an infant and maternal mortality crisis in our country, particularly for Black women? By establishing a gag rule, Donald Trump is forcing healthcare providers to choose between providing full and accurate information on all available healthcare options for women, including abortion, and hundreds of millions of dollars in federal Title X funding. States like Hawaii is refusing to succumb to this unjustified coercion by refusing Title X funds and replacing them with hard-earned state funds so that providers in our state can give the necessary health care to women. And by trying to pass onerous new abortion restrictions in states across the country, conservative forces are working hard to undermine a woman's constitutional right to abortion. One institution that can stand up to this assault on women's rights and women's health is our federal judiciary. Last month, for example, a federal judge in Washington state blocked the implementation of the Trump administration's Title X gag rule. And in March, a federal judge in Kentucky prevented a new law restricting abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy from going into effect. These two recent examples demonstrate the importance of our courts in upholding the Constitution and the law and constraining radical right-wing assaults on women's health and rights. To counter what independent judges are doing, Donald Trump, Leader McConnell, and Senate Republicans are packing our courts with ideologically driven conservative judges who will be on their ideological page. Over the past 2.5 years, they've confirmed more than 100 new federal judges, the overwhelming majority of which were selected by two ultra-conservative organizations, the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. Their efforts to pack the courts continue this week with an upcoming vote on a nominee for the Second Circuit in New York, Michael Park, who fought to restrict access to reproductive health care for women. In one recent example, Mr. Park defended Kansas's attempt to defund Planned Parenthood by terminating its Medicaid contracts. This would have ended the vital services Planned Parenthood provides to low-income patients, such as for cancer screenings and access to contraception. Fortunately, the judges who heard that case rejected Mr. Park's arguments, but now, with his confirmation to the Second Circuit all but assured, Mr. Park is set to become the judge in these types of cases. It's no wonder that both of his home state senators oppose his nomination. Not satisfied with packing our courts with judges who have ideological right-wing agendas, Donald Trump and Republican leaders are resorting to incendiary, reprehensible, and false rhetoric to inflame their base. We've seen this most recently in the debate around the so-called Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, with the vilification of women who seek abortions later in pregnancy. Infanticide is already a crime, but you would never know it if you listen to Republican politicians and their mouthpieces on Fox News and the conservative media. My colleague from Nebraska, for example, accused Democrats in a Fox News op-ed of, quote, blurring the lines between abortion and outright infanticide, end quote. During the debate on the bill, ultra-conservative Fox News host Laura Ingraham compared Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest maternal health provider who has saved countless thousands of lives, to Adolf Hitler, saying, quote, Hitler, just like Planned Parenthood, practiced and defended mass extermination, end quote. Immediately after the Senate defeated this unnecessary bill, Donald Trump tweeted, quote, Senate Democrats just voted against legislation to prevent the killing of newborn infant children. The Democrat position on abortion is now so extreme that they don't mind executing babies after birth, end quote. The president's incendiary and completely false rhetoric on this issue becomes a rallying cry at his bizarre political rallies across the country. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, last month, for example, he said, quote, the baby is born, the mother meets with the doctor, they take care of the baby, they wrap the baby beautifully, and then the doctor and the mother determine whether or not they will execute the baby, end quote. This kind of rhetoric is simply outrageous. It is not harmless electioneering, it's dangerous. It's incitement, and it's provoking a dramatic uptick in threats to abortion providers and supporters of abortion rights across the country. This sustained right-wing attack is taking a heavy emotional toll on women who seek abortions later in pregnancy and the doctors who provide this essential care. Kate Carson, a woman from Boston who sought an abortion after her daughter, Laura, was diagnosed with catastrophic brain malformations in 2012, wrote a powerful op-ed about her painful decision. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that her op-ed be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Here's some of what Kate wrote. Quote, I help run a support group for families who have ended pregnancy after poor prenatal or maternal diagnosis. If you're wondering, who are these women who get abortions in the third trimester? I am, parents who love our babies with our entire hearts. Desperate acts like an abortion in the 36th week of pregnancy are brought about only by the most desperate circumstances and are only available to those who can come up with a lot of money quickly. I know, I've been there. My daughter Laura was diagnosed in May 2012 with catastrophic brain malformations that were overlooked until my 35th week of pregnancy. I did not know much about brain disorders at that point. I imagined developmental delay, special education classes, financial pressure, an overhaul of expectations for Laurel's life and my motherhood. Here were the doctor's real expectations for Laurel. A brief life of seizures, full body muscle cramps, and aspirating her own bodily fluids. It is devastating to lose a child, but unlike most bereaved parents, women like me will live out the rest of our lives as scapegoats, fuel for an agenda that seeks to strip women and families of our reproductive freedoms. End quote. Madam President, it is outrageous and offensive that Donald Trump and his allies in Congress would seek to turn women like Kate into scapegoats for their political agendas. Madam President, I've been an advocate for abortion rights for decades, and I fear that one day soon, women in this country will wake up and realize they no longer have control over their own bodies. What could be more intrusive than the government telling women what they can do with their own bodies? Madam President, in the face of these ongoing attacks on women's health and women's rights, we will continue to raise our voices. We will continue to fight back. I yield the floor.